Oh, hello. I've got this case right here, just in case you want to see what is in here. It is the Osee GoStream Deck kit. So this is pretty interesting. I've talked about video switchers a lot over the years, and it's both something I've seen many times and something I've never seen before. What I mean by that is we've got things like the ATEM Mini, we've got things like the Ulanzi DDO2, these 4-input switchers. They are awesome, some of my favorite devices. And then we've also got things like the YoloBox Ultra and the FeelWorld L4. YoloBox Ultra being super duper capable, FeelWorld L4 having built-in displays, kind of these all-in-one units where you don't need to connect them to a computer, to a display in order to use them. But this is definitely different because not only does it look like a prop from an action movie, but always leaving my video lights in places. This is an all-in-one setup. So you've got your switcher, you've got a case, and you've got a giant 14-inch display all in one, ready to go with all kinds of different inputs. So what I've got here is on the back, we've got 4 HDMI or SDI inputs, so you can choose which one you want to use. We've got 2 USB inputs. We have a network connection. We also have 2 microphone inputs, one here and one on the front there. We have a barrel power connector and then also a regular AC power connector and a USB power output. So if you need to power other devices with this when it's connected, you have really a ton of versatility, which I think for people who do events and stuff like that makes a huge difference. And then the device itself, the case inside, you've got headphone outputs, microphone inputs, you've got an overall power button, a fan power button, and then the switcher itself. So, full disclosure before we jump into this, Osee did send this to me for free so I could see how it works. And the reason that they reached out actually is kind of interesting. When I was making a lot of videos recently about like the Ulanzi and the FeelWorld, in the comments to those videos, so many people were asking if I had used any of the Osee switchers, and I had not. I didn't know about them at all. And so in this video, what I want to do is look at this switcher and see how it's capable, and then also how it fits into this bigger ecosystem right here, and then also how then it compares and fits in with some of the other switchers that I've talked about in the past, just because I do see Osee, a company, doing things a little bit differently. This is not a sponsored video. I do not have to make a video or say anything. I'm under no obligation. They really sent it because they're more interested in like feedback and kind of user experience stuff. But it is pretty cool. I've had this for about 5 months now, so I've gotten to use it quite a bit. I've gotten familiar with it. I've gone through some firmware updates. And once you use one of these types of systems that has a built-in display, it's really hard to go back to one that doesn't have a built-in display. And so this is kind of a cool middle ground where you're taking a switcher that does not necessarily have a display and you're putting it into a setup that does and makes it quite capable. So everything you've been seeing so far is recorded with my Sony FX3. This is a 1080 switcher up to 1080-60. So now we are going to switch over to the switcher so you can see the Osee. Wow. So when everything is set up, this is what it looks like. I have the Osee kit right here, and then I have 4 cameras connected to it, in addition to a microphone, in addition to an SSD that is recording everything you're seeing right now. So the main camera is my Sony FX3. This is all a 1080 workflow because this is a 1080 switcher up to 1080-60. So this is the Sony FX3. My second camera is my Sony a7S III with a 50mm lens. And then I did want to mix things up. I didn't want to just use 2 of the exact same cameras or 3 of the exact same cameras. So my third camera over here is actually the YoloCam S7. And you can see that on my fourth camera over here, which is the OBSBot Tail 2. And I think I can even put that to some auto tracking over here. So hello, now I'm talking to you through the Tail 2, which is a PTZ camera. I can zoom in and it can track me as I go around. The YoloCam S7 is pretty sweet. So this is outputting an HDMI signal into there. The OBSBot is outputting an HDMI signal, as are the other 2 cameras. Now, you might notice if I switch to the Sony camera and the other Sony camera, they match, pretty perfectly because they have the exact same settings, the exact same sensor. When I throw in other cameras like the YoloCam, I did use a software app to try to make it match. And then also same thing with the OBSBot over here. Getting the color and the hue of the OBSBot to match the other ones has been a little bit tricky, but I really like this camera for things like this, especially because it's just me going solo. So if I need to move around or I need to change the angle, then I can do that, you know, pretty easily, especially because I have a little remote here. So even if it's not tracking me, say I want to show the GoStream over here, I can zoom in and now you can kind of see everything that I'm doing over here. So those are the cameras, and then the microphone I'm using is the DJI Mic 2, which is, as you can see here, it's running into the GoStream through the little mic input here through mic 1, and then I am recording to an SSD. So I have this SSD right here, which I don't want to disconnect that. So that is everything that I currently have connected to this setup, and that is what it's working. That's how it's all working. Those are sentences. So let's go through and see how everything actually functions. So the switcher itself is pretty, you know, self-explanatory. You've seen switchers like this. I can even overlay some B-roll footage. It looks very similar to like an ATEM Mini or something that you might have seen, except it is a little bit bigger, and it does have a T-bar, and it does actually have some more functionality. So one thing that's really cool about this specific setup, and the reason that I wanted to check this out is, if you're looking at just the switcher, how much does it cost? The GoStream Duet switcher, this one right here, has a retail price of $395. If you get that, everything that I have connected to it, you can have all these same connections. So this case that it comes in this case, is just, it's sort of like a compact version of everything that you could have connected. So the fact that I'm running all of the inputs in here, that I have the mic going here, that I have the SD card slot, that I have the power going, that's all stuff that you could do even if you just sort of took this out of here or just bought this separately. So the case adds some nice, like, it creates a nice workflow, but it doesn't add any functionality that the switcher doesn't already have. Although it does have, I don't know if you can see here, it does have a fan, and there is a fan control, so I can turn that on. And now there's a little like computer fan going in here to kind of keep things, you know, to keep things cool. Not that it gets super hot, but depending on where you're at, if you're outside or something. And then also you have this little tray here. I don't know if you can kind of see that. There's this empty spot here. This is just sort of to put things while you're using them. So I have my mic 2 receiver up here, and then I also have an SD card because there is an SD card slot. So instead of recording to the SSD, I could record to an SD card right there, and that would work really well. Also, I don't have a super high capacity card, so I just wanted to make sure I didn't run out of space, which is why I'm using the SSD. And then as you can see on the case here, there's all kinds of cheese plates that have, you know, locating pins and different size mounts. There's one on both sides. There's also some on the bottom. So if you want to mount this case on something, if you want to put it on a tripod stand or a light stand or something like that, you can put the case itself. But if you also want to attach stuff to it, like cameras or lights or receivers, especially if you're doing like a wireless system and you have all your HDMI receivers, you could just mount those on arms or something. Right here, you can run cable management. And as you can see here, the screen itself is also really big. This is a 14-inch display, which is super nice. It's a really high quality screen. It's really good resolution, so you can kind of see all the menus and stuff, and then, you know, it works quite well. And that's actually true for how I have everything set up here. So I have my 4 inputs on the top, I have my audio mixer here, and then down here we can also have some different sources. If we have still images or auxiliary images or something like that, we can put those there. I'm not using those today. And then I'm gonna go through the whole menu setup. So if you wanna see how the menu works, we'll go through all that in a second. And then some other basic features of the switcher itself. It does work, you know, the way you would kind of expect these 4 input switchers to work, but it does have some, you know, a few more bells and whistles than something like an ATEM Mini does. It does have direct network connection, so I could push this button and stream directly from here. We also have our audio inputs for microphones, and then for each individual, you know, HDMI input and other source. And then we can also turn on audio follows video. This is basically like audio mixing options over here. We have a power button right here, which is very nice. It actually turns the device on or off. We have memory slots here for different bits of media or macros if we want to program those in. We have menu navigation. And then over here we have our record, playback, everything up here. So I'm not going to touch that because I'm recording right now. And then we also have our transitions here if we want to transition and play with backgrounds and things. There are different transition options, dip, mix, wipe, you know, kind of the standards here. Basically everything you would expect from one of these kinds of switchers. And you do have a T-bar, which works exactly like you would expect. So I can slide this up and it will fade, and then I can slide it back and it will fade. Sometimes the switchers that have T-bars, they don't work 100% intuitively all the time. And this one does, which is really nice. And then you've got your buses right here. So you have your program and your preview windows. Program is red, preview is green. And I can just switch directly between these by pressing the program button so that I don't need to do a preview or anything. But if I do want to use the preview, then I can do that, and I can do an auto transition if I want to, or I can use the T-bar to switch between them. I can have my like 80s music video situation happening if I need to do that right there. And that works incredibly well. And this is also how you would update the firmware. So when you do need to update the firmware, you load it on the SD card, you put it in the SD card slot. If this is not in this case, you just put it in the SD card slot there. And then there's sort of a strange thing when you boot it up. These lights, they all kind of flash red, and it sort of goes in like a progress bar thing. So just know that if you want to update the firmware using the SD card, throwing it through there, that's how you do that. So now I'd like to take you through the menu options, and as you can see, there is a picture-in-picture choice. This is not something I'm adding in during editing. This is my pip in here, which is very cool. We'll kind of go through some of these settings, but I like that I can change the size and add a border in the color that I want. Sometimes most of these switchers, most of these types of switchers do have picture-in-picture options like this, but they don't always let you like control it fully. It's sort of, you know, you kind of pick like which corner you want it to be in, and that's it. This one you have a lot more flexibility. So now I've got the menu popping up here, and it is actually covering my input number 4. So if I turn off the menu, you can see input 4 in my audio mixer. If I turn on the menu, it covers that up while I'm using it. And then there is a little knob right here that's a knob and a push selector, and that's basically how I navigate. And then I can push menu to go back and forth through there. So that's essentially what I'm doing right now. Up at the top, the way that the menu's ordered doesn't necessarily indicate priority at all. So kind of go through each setting and see where the ones that you want are. Because right at the top, for example, we have color background, color 1 or color 2. This is not really a thing that I've ever needed to worry about. So there you go. We have our super source option. So this is now if you want to start throwing in, if you want to do masks, if you want to do keying, if you want to do layers and kind of some overlays and some borders and stuff, you can do that here, which is what you would expect for a $400 switcher, and especially something that kind of looks like this. We've got different key types, so if you want to do, right now we're doing a picture-in-picture, but we could also do like a chroma key, we could do a pattern, we could do a luma key. I'm gonna go back to picture-in-picture because that's what we're doing. So it considers all of those types of overlays, different keys. So basically you choose your key type, and then you can make different adjustments for luma, chroma, and then overall keying. And then we also have our picture-in-picture, which I was just talking about. So this is where you would set the source for your picture-in-picture. Right now I have input number 2, but I could make it input number 1. Obviously I could make it any of the inputs. So I'm just using 2 because I think that this looks nice. And then we also have some other options. This is where we can change our size and position. So right now I have it at 0.25. Here's 0.50. That's probably a little too big. This is fine. I don't need to be all over there. But now I can change my actual positioning, and I can have some pretty fine control over that. It's not just whichever corner I want. So you can kind of, I don't know. I just like the way that you can actually position it properly like that. That's a rare thing in switchers like this. So what I was actually going to do was move this over here, so that way I wasn't blocking more of the menu. And then you've got your Y position as well. Why? Well, in case you want to move it up or down. So I'm just gonna put this kind of back down in the corner here. And then we do also have some more options for picture-in-picture. We can change our mask, we can change our border, we can change the color, you can turn border on and off, you can make the border thick or thin. Obviously I just picked, the blue color that I really like because, believe it or not, I like blue, and I know that's hard to believe. Below pip, we've got some transition options. So if you want to just do the basic mix, dips, and wipes, there's nothing crazy. Fortunately, no star wipes or anything like that. So remember when I said these weren't necessarily listed in priority? I think auto switching is a huge feature that I have not seen in any other smaller, relatively affordable switchers. Because again, this setup that I'm using is like a $1,100 setup. But the switcher itself is a $400 switcher. That's super duper reasonable. I don't know of any other $400 switchers that have auto switching. So the way that auto switching works on here is pretty sophisticated, very similarly, a different version to how like the Rodecaster Video or the YoloBox Ultra approaches it. I can click on auto switching, and then the first option is to either enable or disable it. And then we can choose our audio sources, audio source A and audio source B, which is basically mic 1 or mic 2. Or if you want to go into those, you can also then choose your input. So if you want any of the HDMI sources to be an audio source, any of the SDI sources, whatever different input you want, you can choose that there. And then same thing for audio B. And then we've got video mapping. Basically, if you're unfamiliar with what auto switching is, that means that the video will follow audio. So you pair an audio source to a video source, and then when the switcher hears that audio source, it cuts to that video source that you have selected, which sounds pretty simple. And this is a more rudimentary implementation, which works quite well. The YoloBox Ultra has maybe a little bit more subtle, and same with the Rodecaster Video, where they kind of incorporate different algorithms to make things look very natural. This works very well, but it will give you that more robotic, like we hear the sound, we cut to the video, we hear the sound, we cut to the video, which again, the fact that it is the switcher itself is a fraction of the cost of those other ones. I can't complain. It has auto switching. That's a feature that was asked for so long and so many switchers, and nothing had it. And now we have multiple options for it, which is very cool. And for the most part, when you're doing a multicam auto switching setup, they're kind of designed for 3-camera setups. So say it's a podcast, an interview type thing, you have one camera for one person, one camera for another person, and then a third camera that's kind of the master shot of both of you. We have source A and source B. We can choose which input we want to be source A. In this case, it'd be 1. In this case, it'd be 2. And then A-B mapping is which would our, what would our third source be? An A-B camera, they're calling it, because that would have, person A and person B in it right there. And then we have our switching period. So this is basically how fast you're switching, fast, normal, or slow. That's, how natural or robotic you want it to look, essentially. And then there is also an A-B priority. So that is that master camera that has both people. If you want that to be a high priority thing, so that means it's going to switch to that more often, you turn that to high. If you want that to be a low priority where we don't see that and we see the individual shots more often, and if you want it to be balanced, then that's going to sort of try to balance it out and try to make it look as much as possible like a regular person is switching. The Rodecaster Video, I have found, does this the best, making things look like a natural switch. The YoloBox is really, really good. And then, this can work quite well too. So now I have auto switching enabled, and the way that I have set it up is I have this camera paired to this microphone. I have my FX3 paired to just its internal microphone, which I have turned down. And then I have my A-B camera as actually the YoloCam right here, is this shot right here, heading out over here. So right now, you were just hearing me on this because I have that turned down. So I'm actually gonna go turn up the volume on my FX3. So now I have this camera, I'm kind of backed away talking into this microphone. If my voice is getting picked up on both cameras, then it's going to switch over here to that one. And if I tap the microphone to my FX3, now we switch over there to that camera. So it's weird to do this when it's one person, I'm getting picked up on all the microphones. You can kind of see the basics of how auto switching would work. Now coming back over here to our menu, I put myself back in the corner down here because I like that as I'm looking towards the thing, I'm looking towards the middle of the frame. I don't know. I just think that this looks nicer. So I put my pip back over there. So your disk option, your DSK option lets you choose different sources if you want to incorporate stills and stuff. That's all stuff that you would need to load onto the SD card for the switcher to access. I currently don't have an SD card in there, so I don't have anything to show. Our fade to black option is then going to be how fast it fades and whether or not the audio fades as well. So when you press fade to black on the switcher, does just the video switch out or does the audio switch with it, and how fast does that happen? And then we do have our audio mixer option. So if I click on that, we have both mic inputs along with all 4 other inputs, auxiliary program, even our headphone output. And I can go in there and sort of fine tune each of those sources if I need to. In this case, I'm only really using mic 1 and I just have that enabled, but I do have all of my other inputs, my HDMI inputs 1 through 4 disabled, so that way they aren't getting picked up on the recording. So even though you can kind of see right here, even though like my FX3, it has the Sennheiser MKH50 attached to it, so it's picking up a decent audio signal, but that's not being incorporated into the final mix because only the input from microphone 1 that I'm actually wearing, that's the one being incorporated into the final mix. And if you are incorporating still images, whether the ones you're creating right here from like capturing them in streams or you're bringing them in from memory cards, that's what the stills generated then lets you do. You can upload it from a memory card or you can select different ones and you can position them. So if you want to incorporate still images, you can do that. Now I do want to jump into the macro options, admitting that macro options are probably something that I should incorporate them more. I know they're handy, I don't incorporate them enough. But if there's ever a switcher you want to incorporate macros with, it's this one because it's pretty easy to do it just in the hardware itself. So if I jump back over here, I've turned off my picture-in-picture because I do have these buttons here. They're sort of what is it, 8 macro buttons here. The first 5 by default are just picture-in-picture options. So this will just let me straight from the factory create different picture-in-picture choices right there. And so basically if you do want to create a macro, all you need to do is hold down a button until it starts flashing. And now once this button is flashing, it's basically going to record whatever I do. So if I go into the menu and I add something, if I do switching here, it's going to do that. When I press it again, I didn't do anything, but when I press it again, then it would assign it as a macro, and I can just recreate that right here by pressing that and then clicking the on-air button, deciding what I want to do next. So it's a super simple way to incorporate macros, which is really nice if you have, more complex workflow and you're doing everything hardware-based especially. There is a software application if you want to control this via software, which is very similar to the ATEM software, which I think works pretty well overall. And I'm very impressed though with how little you actually need the software. So you can use it if you want to, but pretty much everything else can be done through here, especially with this specific setup. So if you have the setup with the display built in, then it's super easy. If you're not using the display, then having just the switcher connected to USB for the software makes a lot of sense. And then just finishing up a few things in our menu, we do have some stream options. So this is where you can preload stream destinations if you want different platforms, all that info that you would need to put right there. You can then, if you want to have a preset for Facebook, a preset for YouTube, Twitch, whatever, you can do that right there, or even a custom thing. You've got some playback options here if you want to replay a video and add that in either for review or incorporate it into a stream. And then you do have, at the very, very bottom of the menu, you do have your general settings. So these are all the different things where you can choose, basically the setup of the device itself, how you're doing recording files, what kind of output format you're using right now, all of that sort of stuff. You can set it right here. I did notice for recording, by default, the recording quality was not set to high, so I did set that to high, so that way recording would look as good as possible. And so your settings menu is where you can adjust all the settings here, or again, you could do that in the software application. Now, that kind of covers basically all the basics of the GoStream kit, which I think is pretty cool. Now I have talked about a lot of different video switchers over the years because I think they're really cool, especially with how affordable and accessible they are. I'm going to focus on where this setup fits compared to a few others that I think are more specific competitors. So let's start with the classic, right? Let's start with the ATEM Mini, the tiny video switcher that started all in terms of having 4 inputs, super affordable price. So for $300 MSRP, you can get an ATEM Mini, which is very comparable in a lot of ways to the GoStream over here. This version, the $400 version, does have SDI inputs. So this does not have SDI. There's a higher end version that has SDI. The $300 version of the GoStream does not have SDI. It just has HDMI. So it's much more in line with the ATEM Mini. Now, as much as I love the ATEM Mini, and it does hold a very special place in my heart, I do think since this came out and other small compact switchers have also come out, they've sort of leveled things up a bit. So in this case, size-wise, they're pretty darn similar, but the fact that this does have a lot more functionality with like auto switching, this does have some more graphic functionality, this does have the nice T-bar, and it actually has a physical power button. I actually do think that just switcher-wise, this is a better switcher. The Osee is a better switcher than the ATEM Mini. That is, though, unless you are deep in the Blackmagic ecosystem. So the Blackmagic ecosystem, something that is super cool. If you have one of the ISO models, you can then, output ready to edit DaVinci Resolve files, which is very, very cool. You can also then use this to control Blackmagic cameras. So if you have different Blackmagic cameras and you want to adjust, the focus and the exposure and the color of those things, you can do that right through here. And even though there is a software application for the Osee, which is surprisingly capable, it isn't as fully featured as the ATEM software control is. So if you're deep in the Blackmagic ecosystem, I definitely think that the ATEM Mini is still the way to go. But if you're just kind of looking for, one of these multi-input, relatively affordable switchers, and you're just sort of looking at switcher versus switcher, I do think that the Osee wins out over the ATEM. Now the next one to talk about is a pretty cool one here, which is the Ulanzi DDO2. This is, if you don't want to deal with any software, this is the way to go. It's $300. It has the thing that looks like a goofy face, which I really love. Now this also looks really similar to the GoSee, the Osee. There's the face. I just really like the way that face looks. This one, what I think this has that's pretty unique is I do like the audio input. It works quite well, and I like that this has an audio control. You have your mic inputs right here. You've got your 4 switchers. It does have a little fader, not a T-bar, but a fader. This one, though, the thing about it is it can do this. It can pop apart, and in my review for this, I talk about why I think this is so awesome. Basically, you can run all of your connections, all your cables, your inputs, your outputs, everything through here. And then there's one USB-C cable that can go here to this as a control panel. And I think that is really cool. I do think, though, that that means it is geared, it seems like geared more towards home office and like, you know, personal streaming setups rather than professional setups. Not that you couldn't use it in a professional setting like that. I mean, there's definitely no reason you couldn't. But I feel like that type of functionality where this is always going to have like all your connectivity, all your cables, and that's just going to be like over there, or even, as you can kind of see, it has things to mount it against a wall. That's kind of permanently over there. And then this almost works like a Stream Deck, a totally separate thing here. And then you can just connect them if you want to use it as one thing. So this could be used in professional settings, but I do feel like it is geared a little more towards the home consumer base. And it does have some limitations with picture-in-picture. This is one where you can only choose, you know, what 4 corners of the screen do you want your picture to be? And that's that. So if you just want super simple switching and you also don't want to deal with clutter and cables, the Ulanzi DDO2 is the way to go. Otherwise, the Osee is still probably a better switcher. It really is a super solid switcher, and the functionality that it has built in, especially for the price, is pretty impressive. But that's just talking about switchers. You know, these are just regular switchers. Since I am using the kit here that has, you know, a built-in screen, it's an all-in-one situation, I do want to talk about some other devices that are all-in-one. I'm not going to include the Rodecaster Video in this because it does not have a built-in display. So even though it has so much functionality built in, I don't think it's any kind of direct competitor here because this has a built-in display. So the switchers I have that I feel would compare would be the FeelWorld L4 and the YoloBox Ultra, because these are all in one. You don't need to connect external displays. You can connect your inputs, you can adjust everything with the built-in screens, and you're good to go. Price-wise, they're kind of all over the place. So this is $1,100 for this setup here with the switcher, the screen, the case, all this stuff, $1,100. The FeelWorld L4 is about $540, and this is the whole device right here. And then the YoloBox Ultra did get a price reduction recently, so it's usually between $1,200 and $1,300 now. So some differences in functionality here. That's a pretty big price range, the YoloBox being the most expensive, but also the most capable. So if you want to start adding in graphics, sports scores, really advanced auto switching, streaming to multiple destinations at once, if you want to start doing all that kind of stuff and you want to get, you know, firmware updates every week or two basically, because they're constantly making this thing better, the YoloBox Ultra is definitely the way to go. However, you might notice it is all touchscreen. So you can get the Yolo Deck, which kind of looks like a Stream Deck. If you want some button functionality, you can do that. But the device itself is fully just touchscreen. Not a problem for some people. Some people like physical buttons. So you do have then the FeelWorld L4, which has a giant, this is like a 9 or 10 inch display right here. And then you do have some physical buttons for your switching. You do have a T-bar, and you know, it kind of works the way you would expect. You can navigate the menus and everything through here. And this also does have SDI inputs and outputs, a single SDI input and output, which is pretty cool too. So this is quite capable, especially for the $550 price. I have a video on this. It's really nice. Once you have a screen built into a device, it becomes a huge hassle to then use a switcher where you have to connect it to a display or connect it to a computer just to see what's happening on the switcher. And then that leaves the GoStream Duet kit right here for the $1,100 price tag. So more than the FeelWorld, but not as much as the YoloBox. More capabilities than the FeelWorld, but not as many as the YoloBox. So it kind of fits, it fits right where it should, honestly. It is bigger and clunkier than just something like this is. If you just want to bring the YoloBox or even the FeelWorld, you know, these take up a lot less space. This, however, you do get a significantly bigger display. So there's a YoloBox Ultra, and then here is the FeelWorld L4. So you get basically what is a laptop, you know, size display. And then you also do still have full physical buttons for everything, which to me, I really do love physical buttons, so that's a really nice benefit. And then you do get this case which kind of organizes your inputs and your outputs. It adds, the flexibility with the cheese plates here. And then this case does also have the functionality of the fan, which is pretty cool if you're in a situation where you kind of run your stuff for long periods of time, you're outdoors, you're in warm environments, knowing that everything can kind of stay cool and work really well is nice. And then this all just folds down into a simple setup that you can, take with you wherever you need to take it. So they all have their benefits, they all have pros and cons. This one I gotta say I am overall quite impressed with. The switcher works really well, seems to be quite reliable. I do like this whole setup here, especially for people who do things like events or client work where you're constantly moving your setup around. Having it just natively in its own safe package works really well. Side note, this little tray where I have like my mic thing and that, do not leave anything in here. There's even a USB power if you need to power something. Do not leave anything in here though when you close this, because then it will rattle around and hit the screen and stuff. So make sure this is empty whenever you close this to move it. And the last thing to really talk about is kind of support and updates. So things like the Ulanzi DDO2, there's no software application and there's basically no firmware update. It works quite well. It is what it is, and it's probably just only ever gonna be what it is until it's discontinued. So if you don't like something about it, it's probably never gonna change. The FeelWorld L4, this is a cool entry into the switcher market from a company that already does make a lot of good displays and everything. And so they have been a little more proactive about updating it, but they are kind of starting, this is their first time doing something like this. So it's not going to be as fully featured as something like YoloBox, where just from here you can just update firmware updates constantly. Like, I'm not even kidding when I say like every week, every other week, there's some kind of update for this. They constantly add to it, constantly, talk to the user base and stuff. And all the different YoloBox models seem to last a long time. They update things and they release things, but they support the existing ones for a really, really long time, which is super cool. And then you've got the GoStream over here, which I always accidentally think I'm saying GoStream. That's a very different thing. You have the GoStream over here, which they have been really great about implementing firmware updates and talking about future features, things like NDI, all this really cool stuff that can be added to this, and then the existing things. So I think Osee is kind of going really hard to become a choice in switchers, which seems to be the case since that's what everybody recommended to me when I was talking about other switchers, and I hadn't even heard of them yet. So you do get more firmware update support. The way you do it through the SD card is a little less polished than something like the YoloBox or the Rodecaster Video, where you can just super easily update those on the device itself, or even something like the ATEM Mini, where you can just update it through the ATEM software controls super easily. So, that kind of stuff makes a difference to me, those quality of life features. This is pretty nifty though. It's definitely not a gimmick, and that's kind of what I was thinking at first, like, oh, it's another 4-input switcher. Oh, you got this whole kind of, Caleb Pike all-in-one device setup over here. Absolutely not a gimmick. It works incredibly well, and I think it's definitely a reasonable choice or something to consider. So with all that being said, hopefully this gives you a good look at the Osee GoStream Duet kit and the switcher itself and how it compares to some other switchers. And of course, I do have a lot of other videos and comparisons of different video switchers. If you're in the market, you're not quite sure which is the best for you, hopefully one of these videos can help you figure that out.